So a good friend of mine calls me up. He tells me that his teenage son has found an atheist channel on YouTube, and now he's starting to question his Catholic faith. So my friend wants to know, what should I tell my son? I said, don't worry, I'm going to pick you both up this Sunday morning for Mass, but it's going to be early. It's not going to be your usual 11 o'clock deal. So when I picked him up Sunday morning, I think they assumed we were going to the parish out here in the suburbs, but we weren't. We were driving downtown, and when we pulled in the parking lot, I turned to the young man and I looked at him. I said, modernism and atheism and even fundamentalism, they're really flourishing a lot in today's age, aren't they? And he kind of nods at me, and I said, when you walk into our regular parish and you kind of look around, maybe you get the feeling that there's a lot of questions that you might have, but maybe there's not a lot of answers there for those questions, not a lot of good answers anyways. And he kind of nods, and I said, your church, the Catholic Church, has gone through a lot in the last 50 years, and things look very different today than they did 50 years ago. But let me tell you something. Modernism, atheism, and fundamentalism, those things cannot stand up to the beauty and the truth of this church. Trust me, there is a rock solid answer. This church has the answer. We're going to go inside this church and you're going to see something that you've never seen before, that you didn't even know existed. And when we come out of that church, you're going to have a different feeling about these questions that you have. So after Mass, we went across the street for lunch, and I asked him, I said, tell me what kind of questions you've had that have been challenging your faith. And he gave me a good 3 or 4, and I gave him, just some quick, actually very easy answers, just basic philosophy. And he was surprised at how easy it was to explain, and B, he was really kind of shocked that these were things that he didn't already know. And I explained, I said, education has really transformed. I mean, yes, in the last 10 and 20 years, but I mean, it started, the transformation process started about 100 years ago. So these questions that you're struggling with, maybe you would have had them 100 years ago, but I don't think that this new brand of atheism and fundamentalism and the heresy of modernism, they would not have such an easy go at it 100 years ago. The circumstances that we find ourselves in now is the result of a culture over the course of 100 years that has been dramatically transformed. And I'm going to share this story in much more detail later, but it's a perfect example of what I'm trying to explain. I've got a friend who's in some trouble right now, and he's detained. And I have gone to court on a couple of occasions for his hearings. I don't know any of the details of the story except what was in the news media, and I don't necessarily trust what I read there. I have not spoken to him one-on-one, so I have no information about the case, but it's fairly serious. But while I'm at the courthouse waiting for his hearing, I'm standing in the hallway for the 9 o'clock, which then becomes 10 o'clock, which then becomes 3 o'clock. I'm spending the whole day in this hallway, basically walking up and down, praying the rosary. And as I'm waiting, the people that I'm waiting with, his family, they're all women. His mother, his aunt, people in his family that are women. There's no men from his family there. And as I look down the hallway, as I'm walking back and forth, there's a number of courtrooms and there's a number of families gathered outside of courtrooms up and down the hallway. This scene is repeated up and down the hallway. It's all male defendants with their female family members. Not one dad in the courthouse. Not one dad in that entire courthouse. And after standing there in that hallway praying the rosary for 6 hours, this thought just suddenly occurred to me, maybe it's logical, I don't know, that perhaps that these young men are in court because there's no dads in their lives. There's no men in their lives. That is something that has been transformed in our culture. And that experience does carry over to Sunday Mass. When you look around the church, and just to clarify, the Knights of Columbus are in my parish, and they're an active part of our parish, so this is no criticism of them, but they are a minority. Steve the missionary had a video last week about his Knights of Columbus and how all they do is pancake breakfasts. Steve, you need to come to Nashville, to Middle Tennessee. The Knights of Columbus in Middle Tennessee are actively shutting down abortion clinics, not just having pancake breakfasts. They're financing all of the Right to Life organizations in the city, which have shut down the abortion clinics in Middle Tennessee. Up until last week, for a stretch of a couple of months anyways, there was no place to have an abortion in Middle Tennessee. You had to drive 4 hours to another large city or out of state. Just last week, a new clinic opened up in Mount Juliet offering chemical abortions, and my understanding is that Planned Parenthood in Nashville is going to reopen next week, so I'm asking everybody to pray for those and see if we can shut both of those down again. But the Knights of Columbus are present, and they're doing amazing work. But my point is not that the Knights of Columbus aren't present. My point is that they are present, and they're doing powerful work in this church. But they're a minority. When young teenage men walk into our churches, they're looking around. When they walk into any scenario, whether it's school or a mall, wherever they're going, they're looking around to see. They're looking for male role models. They're looking around the room to see, okay, who is the male in this room that represents what this culture, what this climate is about. When they go to Sunday Mass, there's no men there, except the minority of knights, of course. I spoke with a young man earlier this week about the struggles he was going through. I do this, by the way. I mentor young men. And I was speaking with this young man, and I asked him about his dad and about, I've never seen his dad at church. And he said that his dad told him that church was his mom's thing and it wasn't his thing. And so that's not the culture of the church. That is the secular culture that has influenced our men and caused our men to basically abandon their role as the pastors of their families. So when a teenage young man walks into a mass on Sunday morning and they're looking for that role model, and there's not very many choices there, then they go home and they find some guy on YouTube who's criticizing the church, and he's running an atheist thing online. That seems to be an attractive role model. It becomes something that this young man is going to gravitate to, and that's why atheism is flourishing with young men and young teenage men. It's not because there's not answers to the questions. It's because there's not people answering the questions. That's the reason. When they walk into the parish, they're looking for somebody, not necessarily somebody that will verbally answer the question, but somebody that will give them kind of a visual indication that, yes, there is an answer to a question. When a young man walks into a parish and there's no men there, the uncommunicated message is that men aren't here because there's no answers here. The answers are at home in front of Xbox or whatever video games we're playing nowadays. And that's why our young men are following that path, because that's what's being communicated to them. The culture has to change. What we're experiencing now in the church with liturgical abuses, and what we're experiencing outside of the church with atheism, modernism, and fundamentalism, none of this stuff flourishes in a church in which the men are fulfilling their role as pastors of their families, as leaders, as teachers. And this is not a video about about gender roles. This is a video about men abandoning their roles. We live in an age where liturgical abuses are flourishing because we don't have very many Catholic male role models. And we live in an age where things like atheism and fundamentalism and modernism are flourishing because we don't have very many Catholic male role models. And the obvious fix for this is that you and I fill in that gap, and we take on those roles to mentor young men, to teach them this faith, to pass on this faith, this tradition that we learned somehow in an age when there was a catechesis crisis. Somehow we learned this, but we need to pass it on to the next generation so that they'll have it. But the problem is we also live in the age of the sexual abuse crisis that makes it really difficult to mentor young men. But I'm going to challenge you to do it anyways, just to do it, in the most intelligent way you can. Do it in the narthex after Mass. Do it in public places with the parents involved. Don't put yourself in a bad situation, but mentor young Catholic boys into manhood. And don't just mentor the Catholic kids in the suburbs. Go across the tracks and mentor other kids. Those kids need it also. And actually, they'll probably appreciate it more. Now, last week, I gave 7 steps to a traditional parish. And yesterday, at the Ash Wednesday Mass, I actually thought of an 8th step, which is to pray the St. Michael prayer after Mass as a parish. So check out that video, and if you can think of any other steps to a traditional parish, put it in the comments of that video. I will see you over there.